Hi, Sienna. Welcome to Commonplace. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very, very excited to get
It,
chatting today. So,
yeah, I mean, when I thought of you as a guest, I thought this is very sort of Sienna territory, so it's wonderful to have you finally here. I mean, I bumped into you very briefly at the first book fair, which was an amazing experience for me to see all those stalls, especially all the work you'd done as well. But for people who don't know you, could you just briefly introduce yourself and your work?
yeah, of course. So, I'm a medieval manuscript dealer and historian, and I specialise in manuscripts produced in medieval Europe within a Christian context. And I work at Tom W. Ayling, which is a bookshop based in South Oxfordshire in England. And I run the medieval and Renaissance manuscript department, and I've been working in the antiquarian book trade since the winter of 2024. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a bit of me.
And a lot of people will probably have seen your social media. I mean, you do such a beautiful job of really displaying how bright and vibrant the medieval period was. I mean, I think the Dark Ages conception has completely gone now, if anyone really ever believed it. But yeah, so you really sort of make us believe in these as living objects, which I think is really brilliant. And I'm looking forward to talking more about that. But what sort of sparked your interest specifically in sort of medieval and Renaissance print?
So I've been interested in books for a really long time, but it was at university which really sparked my interest in the history of books, like pre-printing press. And if I'm honest, it wasn't just like a spark; it was like this inferno that happened. And I initially studied English literature and creative writing for my undergraduate, but I did a module in the history of art with literature, which kind of shifted my focus away from writing to look at the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's interpretation of witches, which was really interesting. But with that change of direction, I decided to study the history of art for my MA part time at the University of Bristol. And at that kind of point, I was starting to work in museums and in art galleries and a variety of different roles from working in art camps, curatorial, archival, duty manager. And I really thought curating was what I want to do. I want to work in the art world. So every time, every hour that I wasn't at university, I was trying to break into that industry. But one of my lecturers at the time during my MA made this passing comment about Nicholas Rollin's books, and he was the chancellor for Philip the Good in the 15th century. And I'd never come across medieval books before, but when I went home, I just started looking at them, and I didn't really have a clue what I was looking at because there was just something so enchanting and different about them compared to a printed book that we have now. And this bled into this kind of full blown obsession, which completely changed what I wanted to specialise in. So I learned every single thing that I possibly could about medieval books, just so then I could understand them and then produce a dissertation on them, from the imagery, the structure, some Latin, paleography, how they were made, who was making them. And it was from that point, I knew I had to work with them somehow. So I did everything in my power to make that happen. And yeah, I'm here now. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing that journey because I mean, you can see the creative writing influence in the way that you sort of you tell the story of the object and their afterlife. It's not all about sort of technical processes, is it? It's about the people behind them and who touched them and why they kept them the way they did.
Exactly. That's what's really important to me, is to kind of draw out those other stories that are in them
Yeah.
because as objects they're amazing, but there's so much more to them. So
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it's quite a new field, isn't it? Because I did a material culture module in my final year at Cambridge, and I chose to cheap print and sort of ephemera as my focus. So yeah, I mean, obviously the loss rate is a lot higher than some of the manuscripts you're looking at, but it's still that idea of the book being part of life and not just sort of created and that's the end of it. They're part of the social and the technological processes of the period, aren't they, and everything that came afterwards, including us, really.
yeah, yeah, no, they're fantastic, and they live multiple lives. Is something that I would say. So.
Yeah. So what's one of the biggest challenges that you've come across? You quite sort of I'm new to this field, but I mean already like incredibly knowledgeable, obviously about these sort of manuscripts. But what's one of the biggest challenges you've encountered in your work, and especially with dealing with these sort of illuminated manuscripts?
I think genuinely there's just so many things to learn and to know about in terms of medieval books, from the imagery, paleography, Latin, and you can like specialize within those groups so deeply. The types of books that you get, the texts, and it's such a huge expanse of time that these books were being produced. And I like genuinely really love learning, but I'm someone that puts a lot of pressure on myself to know everything all at once, and particularly when I enjoy it. But that just stems from, you know, a high sense of curiosity and wonder. But I also have so much care for the subject. And because I haven't come from a traditional background in it, I'm very guilty of just swamping myself with information because I just want to know everything now. I remember a scholar once said to me that the feeling of anxiety or feeling like you're out of depth is actually a really great thing, because it means that your brain is being exposed to new information, and what a joy and privilege that is. And the more you start to learn something, the more you realize you don't know, but it's taking that opportunity to kind of step back and then grow and learn. And rather than be frightened, be like, oh no, it's too much, it's just embracing that feeling of, oh, this is just new information coming my way. So I'm definitely a product of my own work, but more importantly, those around me who've helped and shown me things. And I think it's that desire for knowledge and learning that won't go away. It's a good thing, but it definitely is something that I battle with myself quite a lot, because I do just go, oh, I want to know it now.
No, but it's so great. I mean, we always think that people above us, you know, they know everything, but they're constantly learning and doubting themselves as well. I mean, it spurs you on and it makes you a better version of yourself. And sometimes it's hard to forget to look back, really, and see how far you've come. I mean, it is really incredible in such a short amount of time. Yeah. It's so multidisciplinary as well, the work that you do. So the fact that you're so interested genuinely in all areas of it really, I think, shows and shines through.
Thank you. Yeah, it's honestly, it's been such it's like a pinch me moment all the time. And it is lovely because, yeah, there's just so much to learn. There's so many people are willing to share, which is just really, really beautiful. So I feel very lucky. But it's just trying to remind myself it's part of the process. And you never stop learning. You never stop learning.
No. And I mean, a lot of these books, so much is unknown about them. And I say, like, our attitudes towards the books is changing quite quickly as well. Like, if we think about the 19th century, they were so against the marks and all the different, you know, inscriptions that you sort of thrive off in your work nowadays, that you have such a different idea about how valuable they are, don't we? They're not seen as dirty books anymore. They're seen as, you know, insights into stories, like little wormholes, aren't they, into the past?
No, exactly. They're rich. They're so rich. Yeah, stories and people. Yeah. So it's true.
Could you talk a little bit about some misconceptions about medieval manuscripts and maybe the literary culture of the time that these books were made in?
Yeah, so I guess this one might sound a little bit bizarre, but I think sometimes people forget that medieval manuscripts are like books, objects, and there's this idea that they're perfect, but that's not the reality. And I think the majority of time, people's interactions with medieval manuscripts are perhaps in a museum display, like one section is open and it's behind some glass, and often the glass might be dark and then you walk up to it and it lights up because it's just to protect the book. And the ones that are often picked are very, very beautifully decorated, and some with very, very affluent provenance. But the ones that aren't on display are often hidden in archives or in libraries, and you can get them brought up for research. But again, it's just, you don't have that same feeling that they've kind of lost their interactive and tactile quality. And this is for obviously preservation reasons, but these were objects that were made to be held and to be used. Some for display, sure, but they were destined for hands, and they are a product of being made by hands, all parts. And I think that's what, you know, they're very subject to human error. This kind of perfection idea isn't the reality, because there'd be mistakes such as spelling or bits of text that's missed out and recopied, or people having fun and drawing things and things being bound in the wrong order. But you don't always hear that side of things. And the same goes to the people that own these books. The kinds of medieval books that we're used to really hearing about, you know, maybe in the news or in these beautiful displays, are ones that are commissioned and owned by like a royal patron, for example. And while these manuscripts are still spectacular in terms of provenance and technical skill, that isn't where the story ends. There's just not very good records of medieval manuscripts owned by less affluent members of society. And that doesn't mean that they didn't exist. You just have to be a bit more creative about finding them out. So sometimes indirect evidence can help us learn a lot more about book ownership across various social classes. And an example is, there was a legal case that happened in London in, I think it was 1500, where Avis Godfrey was accused of stealing a book of hours from Elizabeth Second, who was a maid. So it's always like really important to just look below the surface of things rather than just taking things at face value. And in terms of like literacy, you know, education was primarily accessible to more affluent members of society, as there was more generally a focus on practical skills in daily life, such as like farming. But again, there would be there'd be exceptions. So I think the thing with the medieval period is just not everything is what it seems, and there's always more that you can like go down and tease out. But it's just, if it's not direct, you've got to look in these other avenues to find things out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying about sort of mistakes as well, because a lot of catalogues, they sort of will list books in their perfect sort of ideal form, won't they? They won't sort of talk about the individual characteristics so much. They'll sort of measure it against this idea of a perfect copy of this book and sort of price them, I suppose, in the book trade according to that, which sort of devalues that story.
No, exactly. And I just think with mistakes, it's genuinely one of my favourite things to spot, because it's that kind of portal to, that's a person who they've gone to work to say for their scribe, and they've been copying things out, and it's quite a labour intensive job, and suddenly they've spelt something wrong. It's like, oh my gosh, this is actually a really expensive mistake. And just like we would now, you might feel a bit panicked if it's going to cost your company or manager lots of money. So imagine just going home and be like, oh, I've made a really expensive mistake, and I feel a bit rubbish about it. Or I've just started as a scribe and I'm finding it really challenging. And it's just things like that. It just helps. I don't know. It's a reminder of these people who are producing them are just people, and they aren't machines. They get it wrong, and they have their own life. And you can kind of get a tiny, tiny window into a part of them. And even without knowing their name, you just get a sense of who they are. So it's really nice.
Yeah. Also, our idea of what reading actually meant is probably very different in the medieval period, wasn't it? With oral culture and sort of that idea of book hospitality and allowing people to use your library, and reading sort of meaning reading aloud most of the time. I think we're probably not aware of the extent to which people engaged with these books in different ways, as there's no record of it.
No, exactly. You know, oral culture is so important in the history of books. And I think, again, like you say, just because the records aren't there, it doesn't mean it wasn't existing. It was very, very important, and it was a different way that people could interact with literature, and a really important one too, because a lot of these stories had kind of things about general life and would help people through a literary basis. So yeah, it is really, really interesting. It's just not what you might think of it naturally, but there's just so many different layers to book culture.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned the Book of Hours, which is obviously a really sort of inspiring and thought-provoking type of book from this period, but they're often shown people holding them, aren't they? So they're not only beautiful and decorative, but they're also highly interactive and personal to people. So could you just talk a little bit about sort of the medieval connection to the materiality of books?
Oh, it's such a wonderful thing, and I think it's genuinely one of my favorite topics. But I'll explain about the Book of Hours first, because that is the kind of the vehicle for a lot of this touch relationship. The Book of Hours is considered to be a medieval bestseller, and they ranged from simple to luxurious. They could be very pristine or well thumbed. And they essentially are a devotional manual designed for personal prayer, containing offices and other religious texts called hours. And each office is centered around a specific theme, such as the Virgin Mary. And the office of the Virgin Mary was a particular favourite of the medieval period. And this contained psalms, reading and prayers. And it's a simplified version of the divine office that was adapted for everyday use by people not necessarily working within a religious context. And they use the term hours to refer to specific times of day that were designated for prayer, and it would follow kind of a daily structure that they would have in monasteries. But they were very much like portals to someone's interior, and you can learn a lot about a person without knowing their name. And so the one that I have in the office is a very, very small book of hours, and there's lots of signs of use for the office of the dead. And this would be used when someone died, this particular prayer cycle. And the first prayer was to be recited the night before a funeral. And the miniature opening this office shows a burial scene that has been rubbed extensively to the point where the pigment on the priests have gone. And the same with the body. And to me, this shows that this page was frequently returned to. Perhaps the owner experienced a lot of death in their life, or perhaps a very significant death which greatly impacted them as they returned to this page in grief. And while we don't know their name, we can hold a piece of them like in our hands. 500-year-old grief is something that we can really, I don't know, everyone can connect to. And I think that's the thing about books. There's just something so personal about them. They would be passed down generations, and sometimes different family lines would have one book that would go through them, and people would write in the calendars like birthdays, anniversaries of marriage, of death, and they would kiss and rub miniatures as they were praying. So it's like a really physical connection, and you still get that with books now, and I write in my books, but it's just this kind of, I think because the medieval period feels so distant, and particularly these books can feel really distant, you do get a sense of grief, fear, hope, desire, everything, which is what I love to see in books. But again, you don't always see it. Sometimes they're really pristine and really clean. And again, you can still learn something about somebody by how they kept their book. If they didn't want to write it, that's a choice for them. And, you'd have various degrees of interaction. And there's a scholar called Catherine Rudy, and she's an absolute pioneer in this field. And I highly recommend reading her on this subject. But in one of her papers, she suggested that Philip the Good, who was the Duke of Burgundy in the 15th century, may have gone like a step further by scraping off the pigment from the face of Christ in Manuscript by using a sharp instrument as it left the parchment bare. And she suggested that it's possible that these pigments were then diluted in water and then drunk by Philip the Good as a medicinal act of devotion and a spiritual food. So the kind of medieval connection to books was just very, very physical sometimes. And you learn so much about someone by how they have handled or haven't handled their book.
Yeah, I think we can relate to that so much in our sort of technology saturated lives. I mean, people turning back to journaling and really embracing that sort of sensory experience, of having a book in your hand. And I don't know, I think you can, it's so different in our approach now. I mean, people, like I said, in the 19th century, they would almost whitewash these sort of things out, wouldn't they? But we're losing that trail of human touch through the ages, which really are as important as the book themselves, aren't they?
Yeah. I think it's, sometimes even with like medieval manuscripts, sometimes you'll see a name which is later, maybe perhaps from the 18th century, and then someone's like crossed it out and then they've added their name, and it's just there's just something about how books travel through time, and even having them now, we're all part of that history, and that will go on even though we're not writing in the books, or I'm not writing my medieval books. It's still, you're interacting and learning about them, and that kind of inserts you into that life cycle of that book. And there's just something that's really special. And I always say that medieval manuscripts, when you're looking at them, it's like reaching your hand through time and holding the hands of every single person that have come before. And some people are silent in their presence, and some people are really loud. And every single person still matters, both from production, ownership, maybe it's in someone's drawer, and it's just, every single part of that history is so important. And it's just kind of having sometimes an open mind to be like, even if I can't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. Someone's been there at some point. So
I mean, it's so true what you say. It is as physically close as we can get to people in history, touching the things they touched. I mean, there's so much to think about, isn't it? Especially if it's somebody you feel connected to through their story. So kind of linking into this, sort of seeing us as part of the life cycle of these books and carrying on their legacy, I'm sure there's something that you've come across is a sort of elephant in the room, I think, for a lot of book dealers at the minute and museum creators, is the change in attitude towards how we handle these books. I think we've turned away from using gloves, haven't we? So do you want to explain why this is, and why touching them with your hands has become sort of normal practice now?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's something I get asked quite a lot. And I guess in like simple terms, it's because we don't want to damage the books and manuscripts. And you might see in films or in TV or in the news people wearing gloves to handle old, rare, or valuable books, but it is all for show. The truth is that in all cases, wearing gloves increases the risk of damaging the book because gloves provide an additional layer which reduces your sensitivity and manual dexterity. So it wouldn't be possible for you to turn the pages safely in a book, or you can't really feel the pages that you're holding onto if you were wearing gloves. Also, gloves are no cleaner than hands. They retain more dirt, and the fibers of the cotton gloves can really lift pigments and ink from the pages and transfer dirt from one book to another. Leading libraries and museums around the world have published their advice on it and why gloves shouldn't be used in their reading rooms. And instead, you should handle books with clean and dry hands. So give them a really good wash, dry them, and then that is the safest way. And unless you're handling a book which has got something incredibly toxic on it, if it's like an arsenic green binding, then yeah, wear gloves to handle that because that wouldn't be safe. But generally, it is safe practice to handle them without gloves.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of how the bookmakers intended, isn't it? It's the most natural way of handling them. I mean, they've lasted all these centuries with people holding them and doing much more to them, haven't they, than us being so gentle with and holding them like this precious object now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's just when, like, with the book of hours I have in the office, it's tiny. And if I was wearing gloves, I just wouldn't be able to safely turn it.
Sensitivity.
Yeah, you've got to just be able to feel it. And it's just... it's just so much better for the object, and otherwise, you do run the risk of ripping it or pulling it in some way. And so best practice, just clean, dry hands.
Yeah. Well, thank you for clearing that up. I think a lot of people still, question themselves or double check, when they see it, because we're so used to that idea. So could you talk a little bit, because I think that there's still this assumption that scribes and, guild members and monks, obviously monks are always male, but I mean, the book trade itself was very male dominated. So do you want to talk a bit about the involvement of women in the book trade and production?
This is honestly my favourite topic. And it's basically, there's a very common perception that men were the makers of medieval manuscripts. Particularly when there's an unnamed scribe or illuminator, people just tend to assume they're male, but this is not always the case. Women existed as scribes, illuminator, book traders, runners of workshops, and they thrived. One piece of evidence that we have for female scribes is through colophons, and that's kind of a note that is left behind by a scribe, and it sometimes supplies information such as a name. There's a really, really interesting study that the University of Bergen did in 2025, and they determined that at least 110,000 manuscripts were copied by female scribes based on colophons, of which 8,000 should still exist. And they mentioned a colophon from a female scribe named Birgitta in the 15th century, and her colophon, it said something along the lines of, I'm a nun in a monastery at Munkeliv at Bergen, and she'd written this psalter with initials, but not as well as she'd ought, or something like that. And you just get that tiny, tiny glimpse into, again, somebody and their life. But another way that they could be identified was by referring to themselves as a scriptrix, and that's a female scribe or soror, which means sister in Latin. And, like you said, medieval book trade was regulated by the establishment of guilds, and there are some examples of guild records which gives us an insight into the operations of the early book trade and into women's involvement in this. There was the Guild of St. John the Evangelist, and from the 15th century in Bruges, it was required that anyone working in the book trade had to join. So between 1454 and 1500, women made up a quarter of its members, and they were named apprentices, illuminators, owners of workshops, such as Christine Burns, who was an illuminator, and she ran a workshop around the late 15th century, and she trained men and women as illuminators. So it's really important that if we see an unnamed work, which you do most of the time. We don't assume it was created by a man. And I think it's just like that constant questioning. You know, you've got Guda. She was a German nun, an illuminator from the 12th century, and she's known for creating one of the earliest signed self-portraits. And it's just like,
Yeah.
I only found out about her in the last few years, and it's just, you know, how it's such an amazing thing. And she has a line that she'd written under her portrait saying, Guda, a sinner, wrote and painted this book. And it isn't just people that were creating the books, but also people who were authoring things. You know, Marjorie Kemp authored the Book of Marjorie Kemp, which is known as the earliest surviving autobiography written by women in English. And she was born around the mid-14th century. And then you've got Christine de Pizan, who is considered to be the earliest professional female author. And it's just all these amazing women in medieval history, I think. And now more and more people are starting to do more research, and kind of attitudes are starting to change. But certainly I do, when I have conversations with people, it is a knee-jerk reaction. People go, he's a great illuminator. And I was like, you don't know.
Yeah. I always come back to the quote by Virginia Woolf that anonymous is always a woman.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's so important to question. And I feel particularly passionate about it because, I'm a woman in the book trade, and I feel like I'm continuing this tradition of women in these spaces. And it just feels really special to know that, the time period I studied, women were there and they were doing really amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that, they'd be thrilled with the work you've been doing. I'm sure that, obviously it's a history waiting to be fully told still, and that's exciting in itself, but it's a shame that, as you say, it's taken this long to really recognise these women and how, incredibly influential they were. I mean, Christine de Pizan's obviously been recognised for quite a while, but I'm sure there are lots of women who were equally as amazing as her and, really impacted print culture throughout the medieval period.
Exactly.
So I think commonplace books are actually something that is a great insight into the lives of women and what they read. So if you could have access to anyone's commonplace book throughout history as a sort of insight into their working life, their personal thoughts, who would that be?
This is a really hard question because there is genuinely so many people that I would be really interested in knowing about, but I guess if I had to pick one right now, it'd probably be Christine Burns, the illuminator that ran the workshop around the late 15th century and was training people. I just think it would be really interesting to get an insight into what inspired her, what was going on around her, what was her life like, and what was she thinking about, and particularly as, a woman heading a workshop, there's just something about it. And I think I've got a name and her occupation. But the rest is unknown. And it's things like that I really love. I'm so curious to understand people and know people. And I think because I've got this kind of glimpse of her, I'm like, I really want to know more. Because again, it can also teach us so much about book trade, how it operated, and just understanding, women who was doing amazing things in that time. I'd love her.
Yes. And it'd be nice to ask her sort of how she got interested in this world as well, like what triggered her. But obviously, having a name and occupation is really annoying. Just it's so little, but I mean you can imagine so much, can't you? The endless possibilities of what her day-to-day life was and her interactions and her conversations and what she was reading. Yeah, it's
what she was enjoying.
Yeah.
And, did she like to paint a certain thing? Or was there things she was like, oh, I don't want to do
another
that.
one.
It's those little things that just make people who they are.
Yeah. So should we touch on a little bit about what makes you who you are in your commonplace book? Because I think we'll have some really great insights. One question I kind of want to bring into this before I talk about what your commonplace book would look like is how would you describe yourself as a person?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would describe myself as curious, very, very, very curious, and both academically and also in people. Curious and I love to understand and to learn, and that transcends every aspect of my life. That I don't think will ever go away. Um, Very hopeful and positive, and that's something that I like to try to be. But yeah, I think curious
Yeah,
is the biggest thing in my
yeah,
life. That is.
vital. Yeah. So what would your commonplace book look like? Obviously, you've looked at so many books, and I'm sure you have an idea of the sort of aesthetic that you choose for your commonplace book.
Again, this is a really cool question because I get to think about all the lovely books that I get to handle. But I think in terms of binding, I really like cathedral bindings. They're beautiful. They've got the shape of a cathedral on the front, and I really love kind of like a dark brown leather. Lots of gilt decorations, lettering, gilt edges. And if I was going to go further, I would have parchment pages,
Yeah.
just just because I feel like it would be wrong if I
Yeah.
didn't. And there'd be a really nice illumination perhaps on the front page of just lots of amazing medieval women. Because I think, that's something I really care about. And yeah, that would be really, really fun. And maybe a nice clasp, just really over the top.
Yeah. I love how specific it was, but I wouldn't expect any less. But um, we talked about. I mean, if people had your commonplace book, would it be sort of well thumbed, or would it be sort of pristine?
Oh, it'd be so like well
Yeah.
thumbed. I'm someone that my books at home or my journals are so, uh, not destroyed, but they are,
Well
I
loved.
break spines of my own
Yeah.
books, and I write in them. I put, if it's a journal, I put things in it like flowers or pictures. I write over everything. So it would be, I have a very tactile relationship with my books, and my commonplace book would definitely reflect that.
Yes.
Otherwise, I feel like it wouldn't be me.
No. No. Of course. Yeah. So what if you were to record like a particular philosophy or a quote? Is there one that stands out that's had an impact for your life, on your working or your personal life, really?
Mm. It's funny because I used to genuinely love a quote when I was little. I used to print off pages and pages and pages of quotes, and I collaged them all over my wall by my bed and put them all over my ceiling as well, so I could read them. Um, but if I was to think of one that inspires me, I think it's the "I'm Not Afraid of Storms, or I'm Learning How to Sail My Ship" by Louisa May Alcott, Little Women, who wrote Little Women, and it's yeah, it's just something about some things are out of your control, like the weather, and some conditions are really hard, but it's just about how you move through it, and it's you know I like to think of that during hard times, both if I'm struggling with something at work or in my personal life. I think it's just it's a voice that speaks to me quite a lot. It's whatever it is, I can do this, and it's just about learning and adapting and moving forward.
It's very similar to the idea of that other quote is trees bending with the wind and not snapping, isn't it? It's moving with the
Yes.
things you can't control instead of trying to force your way back against them. It just makes things doubly worse.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's things like that. I love just hope,
Yes.
hope as
Yeah.
well, and
Nothing's
perseverance.
permanent.
Mm,
Yeah.
exactly.
So obviously you have a very good idea about sort of visual culture and probably what you like in that area as well. So what about one photograph or even a copy of a piece of art that you could put into your commonplace book that you'd like to keep coming back to?
I think a photograph would be there's a photograph of my mum, my granddad, and myself all like dancing together. It was at my nana's birthday, and she's in the kitchen, and that's a photograph. It's like obviously it's a personal one. I'd put it in there because it just both my mum and my granddad are really key figures in my life. They inspire me so much, and also it was a nice memory. But my granddad is a really big history fan, and he would talk to me for hours and hours and hours about different historical things, both to do with our family and just general history. And my mum, when I was growing up, would take me to lots of different historical sites. So that's a really key thing for me. Is they both kind of brought me into this curiosity and wanting to see and understand and be part of it. So Yeah, and they're such amazing and kind people, so that would definitely
Yeah.
be it.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, that's perfect because it's reminding you also why you're doing everything and what's led you to this point, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about music? Is it something that you turn to when you're wanting to uplift yourself? Is it something you listen to while you're working? What's sort of your relationship to music?
Oh, I've got such a deep connection to music. I think particular songs for me really will take me back to a particular moment, and if I listen to them again, I'm almost like transported there. And there's a song called Outro by M83, and that's probably one of the most like emotionally charged ones for me because I did the Brighton Marathon back in April for the charity Refuge, and I had rolled my ankle and my tracker wasn't working, so, and I was in a lot of pain. So I was really just going off of, I think I'm near the end, and I've just got to keep going. And you'd gone through months and months of training while I was, working as well. So I'd be getting up at ridiculous hours so I could run before work or run after work. And running for a charity also made it a really big moment. And that song came on the kind of the final bit of the marathon, and I was just a bit, I was gone. I was in so much pain, and someone shouted to me to look up. They were like, "Look up, look up, look up! The finish line's ahead of you." And I was listening to that song, and there's a moment in it when it goes like really quiet. And you kind of just don't really hear anything, and I just then the crowds were starting to yell, and it was like, oh, so and then the song started to build up again, so I
Oh,
took one
wow.
headphone out and was just listening to both, and honestly it was just such a big moment, and the line came of like now and forever I'm your king as I crossed the line, and I just cried my eyes out. It felt so emotional,
Wow.
and it's a poignant moment I'll never forget.
I mean, the
um
timing of music can be so strange sometimes how it pops up in your life, can't it?
yeah, I
Yeah.
know. And it was a really amazing song. It was my headphones were on shuffle, and I don't actually remember
Yeah.
most of the music I heard during the marathon because I was just trying to get through it. It's the last 10K, which is really hard, and I think because of working and running and doing other hobbies, it'd been such a intense time that it was just this cathartic moment. So that's a special song to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine every time you listen to it now, you can remember that moment where somebody shouted out, and then you hear the crowd coming over. Yeah, how magical to make it like your song in a way, to have that kind of, yeah, that soundtrack over the song.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I always think back to that moment. I was listening to it in the car this morning, and it's like this transportation back
yeah,
in
like a
time.
movie scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a main character moment.
Yeah.
So what about a particular place in the world? If you could have a postcard, where would that be from?
Definitely from Geneva. I went there a few years ago, my first ever solo trip, and I was going through quite a tough time, and so that place holds a lot of significance to me. I booked it last minute, and I was like, I'm going. Let's just go for it and see what it's like. And I decided on that trip, I was like, I'm gonna just go through a time of change. So I'm gonna do this, and I'll be fine. I'm gonna get through it, but I'm gonna change my life, and it's gonna be okay. And I was staying in this really small village, actually out of the city. And I was there during the summer solstice, and I went out at night. The moon was really bright, and there was no one around. It was just so quiet. It was such a sleepy little village, and I just remember like skipping and twirling down the road, listening to the I think it's the end of beginning, and I just was like, oh, I know it's going to be okay. So a postcard from there,
Yeah,
that would be what was going in.
I love that detail. It sounds like something that I would do. Like, I'm glad somebody gets it. Like, it's when you're completely alone and you just like, yeah, it's so
Just
magical
let
when you can
it
just do that. And yeah,
go.
no, I completely understand that. um, what about? I mean, obviously, like the manuscripts you deal with, you're not necessarily reading them as books. So, what if you had to record like a book that you'd recommend to people to keep going back to that you've read recently or a long time ago?
I really loved the book Salka by Francesca Simon. It's such a rich retelling of a Welsh myth, and it's the way it's written is incredible. It's got multiple voices, and it's about the Lady of the Lake, and I felt so bewitched by that narrative. And it was one of those books I picked it up and I started reading it and I just couldn't put it down. It devoured me and I then devoured it. I was reading it so quickly and it's fantastic. I can't recommend. It's just so you're just completely taken out of your body into another world. So I really really recommend that book.
Great. Yeah, sounds wonderful. What about cooking? Do you like to cook? Is there a recipe, a family recipe maybe, or something you've started cooking recently that you'd like to write down?
Oh, I love cooking. Cooking for me is a big hobby. I find it really fun. I think it would be a recipe from, I've got a cookbook called Pasta Grannies, and it's an amazing cookbook, and it's basically just lots of very, very simple Italian recipes for pasta, and you can also make the pasta and the sauce, and it's just lovely. And I've got really fond memories of making dishes from that cookbook with people or for myself. And there's one recipe in there which is like a tomato pasta dish with like sausages and shallots, and it's super simple, but it's one of those things where sometimes like simple is really nice, and you can just make it slowly like with somebody or on your own. And yeah, I love a cookbook, so that one would definitely, I just got so many nice memories of doing it.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you were looking forward and backwards, what's something that you're grateful for right now and something that you'd like to achieve by this time next year?
Something I'm grateful for right now is genuinely the people in my life who have believed in me like so fiercely, particularly in moments where I just didn't believe in myself. And I'm so lucky to have such an amazing group of friends and family who have always like supported and championed me, even when I've just, gone, I'm just going to go do this, and they're like, go for it. And they're cheering me on. And, I'm very lucky with the people that also give me opportunities and open doors and believe in me in that sense, that I can do something that I might not have thought I could do. And then I guess looking forward, I guess I really just want to keep growing in my job as a medieval manuscript dealer and historian. I really love engaging with people and talking to people. So, more public speaking and engagement. It's not something that I would naturally do, or I never thought of myself as doing, because I used to be very shy. But my love for the subject and also sharing that with people is so important to me. So it's something that, next year I'd love to be doing more talks and, maybe going and visiting schools and getting people excited about medieval history, about the things you don't necessarily get to learn. So it's just, continue like growing, and also in the book trade, really establishing myself and growing more. So that would be the goal.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, you talked about sort of having been shy. I think until you found your people and your passion, I think a lot of people probably think they're shy or they haven't the right people cheering them on. I think, you found your passion. I mean, I'm sure so many people would be inspired, especially younger people. You can imagine yourself back then having somebody speak about it and encourage you to look into something that you didn't think was for you. It's so important.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
So it's, it's the people around you really lift you up, and also the thing that you care about lifts you up too.
Especially when you talked about, the lineage of women in this industry as well. I mean, it's probably something that spurs you on every day. So you talked a bit about how much you like to touch and use your books as living objects. What would you put in your Commonplace book as a sort of wild card, which can be anything from a pressed flower to an anecdote or a sketch, basically anything that you'd like to put in for yourself?
I would definitely put in a memory. So I had a teacher at school called Mr. Hoyes, and I have to thank him for my whole career, which is why he would have to be in there. And so I was super uninterested in everything at school. I had a really, really awful experience with a teacher who belittled me academically very badly, to the point where I genuinely thought I would never achieve anything, and I just wanted to leave school as soon as possible. It wasn't for me. And in year 9, Mr. Hoyes was my teacher for English, and he thought I could be a very talented writer based on some homework that I'd submitted, some creative writing. And he set up this group to meet at lunch to do creative writing and then give feedback. And he asked my mum if she could encourage me to go. and he essentially tutored me in how to write, and we'd read each other's work to one another because he was a writer, and we would give feedback. So I was starting to develop a critical mind, and he introduced me to some fantastic pieces of literature and really got me into reading. And I still have the copy of The Great Gatsby, which he gave me, which was the first book I read properly. And the Creative Writing Club got bigger, and I went every single Wednesday at lunch without fail until I left school after my GCSEs, to which my grades were far better than had been anticipated, based on him kind of sparking that interest. And it really felt like I found something, and I went on to study creative writing at university. And it's quite sad because Mr. Hoy sadly passed away, but anything that I write is dedicated to him, as he was a fantastic teacher and really, really an important person as part of my career and also personal development. So that would be my wild card.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I'm so sorry to hear you had that experience with a teacher. I mean, like it can really completely destroy people's confidence, that sort of thing. I mean, I've had like bad experiences in school and sort of had a non-conventional route to history. I've been a bit like you, so I can totally relate to that. And, you know, just having one thing change or one person introduce you to something and set you on this path. I mean, the tale could have been so different, couldn't it? I'm sure it is for a lot of children, which, I mean, it makes it even more important that you go through if you feel like you want to talk to students and things, because you could be that person for them, which I totally understand, having heard that.
Yeah, I think it's just, teachers are such important figures in your life growing up, and I'm so grateful that I had him as my teacher, because otherwise my life could be very different. I don't know what I would have been doing now, and I really, really enjoy what I am doing, and it's a real testament to him. So very, very grateful, and a teacher can really change your life. So
yes. Thank you so much for this conversation, Sienna. I mean, you're such a wonderful person by the sounds of it, and like really inspiring to so many people to sort of see this area that once was so closed off and elitist in many ways, and see that it's it's for everybody, and everybody has, a range of people have enjoyed these books throughout the ages, and we shouldn't be any different. I think that that's my main takeaway from everything you've been doing. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's been really wonderful to speak to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's just, it's such a wonderful idea for a podcast, and it's so lovely to kind of, talk about both medieval books and also just like Commonplace books. It's so interesting, and no, I'm really grateful. So thank you. Had a lovely time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.